There are places in this world where the darkness never truly sleeps, where shadows whisper and the trees remember. Our town had one such place, a forest so old, so twisted, that even the bravest dared not enter after nightfall. They called it Forest's Heaven, but there was nothing heavenly about it. The legend spoke of a faceless hunter, a figure that moved between the trees, waiting, watching. No one who saw it ever returned. That winter night, Seth and I thought it was just a story. We were wrong because something was out there, and it was waiting for us. Deep in the woods, hidden among the trees, lay an old forgotten junkyard. It was our secret place, a graveyard of rusted metal and broken things. Seth and I spent hours there, breathing life into discarded relics. That night, we worked on an old radio, twisting its dials, trying to resurrect its voice. The cold bit at our fingers, our breath fogging in the air. Then, we noticed the time, 9:30 p.m. The forest around us felt different, heavier, as if the trees were listening. A silence fell. We weren't alone. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. The radio sat between us, its cracked surface covered in dust, its tangled wires exposed like veins. Static crackled softly from the speaker, an eerie whispering sound that sent a chill up my spine. The forest had fallen silent, too silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the radio's broken hum. Then, I glanced at my watch. 9:30 p.m. My stomach tightened. We had stayed out too late. Everyone in town knew what that meant. The legend of Forest's Heaven wasn't just some ghost story told to scare kids. It was a warning. Seth and I locked eyes. We didn't need to speak. We both felt it. The air had changed, thick with something unseen, something wrong. It was the kind of silence that made you feel small, like you were being watched from all sides. A branch cracked in the distance, not the wind. A footstep, we shot to our feet, the radio forgotten. My pulse pounded as I scanned the darkness between the trees. Nothing, no movement, no shape, but we knew we weren't alone. Something was out there, and whatever it was, it had been waiting. We ran. The cold air burned my lungs, my heart slamming against my ribs as we tore through the trees. The old dirt path stretched ahead, barely visible in the moonlight. I could hear Seth's footsteps pounding beside me, both of us too scared to look back. The woods felt different now, like they were closing in. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting like grasping fingers. The trees, once familiar, now loomed like silent figures, watching, waiting. The legend of Forest's Heaven echoed in my head. A man with a gun, a knife, a faceless hunter that never left witnesses. Halfway home, we reached the fork in the path. We had to split up. Seth took the left path, I took the right. I forced myself forward, breath ragged, legs shaking. Then, my foot caught. I hit the ground hard, pain exploding in my knees. My hands scraped against frozen dirt as I struggled to push myself up. And that's when I saw it just 2 feet away. A shape, standing behind a tree. Still, silent, watching not Seth, not human, something else. And it was waiting for me to run. For a moment I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figure stood just behind the tree, its body barely visible in the darkness. It didn't shift, didn't twitch, just stood there, watching. The way it blended with the shadows was unnatural, like it wasn't entirely part of this world. My stomach turned. This wasn't Seth. It couldn't be. He had gone the other way. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I felt trapped in that single moment, staring at the thing that should not have been there. Then it moved. Not a normal movement. Not like a person stepping forward. It slid, shifting slightly, as if adjusting to see me better. I swear I heard it breathe. Slow, deliberate, almost thoughtful. That was enough. Adrenaline surged through me, breaking my paralysis. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and ran. My legs burned, my chest ached, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back, because I knew, if I did, I'd see it again. Closer, and I wasn't sure if I could survive that. The old fence was just ahead, splintered, rotting, barely standing. My only way out, I reached it, hands shaking as I scrambled up. The wood groaned under my weight. Every second felt like an eternity. I could feel it behind me, closer, watching, waiting. As I pulled myself over, I dared a glance back. The trees stood still. The path was empty, but I knew it was there, hidden. Waiting in the dark, I hit the ground hard, breath ragged, and ran the last stretch home. That night, a single gunshot echoed through the woods. Someone didn't make it out. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body still trembling. I had made it home, I was safe. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But my mind wouldn't let go of what I saw, the figure standing there, watching. Not moving like a person should. The house was silent, but outside, the wind howled through the trees. I thought I could hear something beneath it, something faint. A whisper? A breath? My imagination, I told myself. But my mind wouldn't let go of what I saw. The figure standing there, watching. Not moving like a person should. The house was silent, but outside, the wind howled through the trees. I thought I could hear something beneath it, something faint. A whisper. A breath? My imagination, I told myself. Just my imagination. Then, the sound came. A single gunshot. Sharp. Deafening. It echoed through the woods, shattering the stillness of the night. My chest tightened. I sat up, heart pounding in my ears. And then, silence. No sirens, no voices, just emptiness, the kind that made my skin crawl. The next morning, the news spread fast. A 15-year-old boy had been found dead in the woods, shot, no suspect, no witnesses. I didn't go back to those woods after that night, because deep down I knew the truth. The legend of Forest's Heaven wasn't just a story. Something was out there, and it was still watching. Days passed, but the feeling never left. The weight of unseen eyes, the whisper of something just beyond sight. One evening, I dared to look back, just once. I walked to the edge of the woods where the trees loomed like silent sentinels, and there, carved deep into the bark of an old tree, were two words: I see you. My blood ran cold. The message wasn't old, the cuts were fresh. I turned and walked away, never looking back, because I knew whatever was in those woods never left, and worse, it never forgets. The road stretched endlessly, swallowed by the cold, unforgiving night. Snow drifted across the cracked pavement as the old Ford van rumbled forward, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The towering trees flanked both sides, their skeletal branches reaching like grasping fingers. The wind howled, whispering secrets of the unknown. Inside the van, the warmth felt fragile, fleeting. I was just a child, lost in my own world, excited for December, but something unseen lurked beyond the trees, watching, waiting. I didn't know it yet, but that night something unnatural had set its sights on me, and it never left. I played in the cold, my breath curling in the air, my boots cracking the ice beneath me. Then the feeling crept in, an unnatural stillness. I wasn't alone. Slowly I lifted my gaze to the house, where the van's headlights bathed the wall in harsh light. And there it was, clinging unnaturally like a grotesque insect. Its skin, stretched thin over bone, was a sickly yellow. Huge, glowing red eyes burned into me, a mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth, hung open in silence. I froze in terror. It watched me, waiting. Then, instinct took over. I ran. I burst through the front door, gasping, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The warmth of the house wrapped around me, but it did nothing to chase away the ice lodged in my veins. I ran straight to my mother, my small hands clutching at her sweater as I sobbed, the words spilling from my lips in frantic desperation. There was something outside, on the house. It was watching me. She knelt beside me, smoothing my hair with a gentle smile. "Sweetheart, you've been out in the cold too long. It was just a shadow. Your imagination." I shook my head violently. No, it was real. It had red eyes and a huge mouth. Please don't go outside." She glanced at my father, concern flickering across her face. "I can have Daddy check if that'll make you feel better." Panic surged through me. "No, don't let him go out there." She sighed and pulled me into a hug, whispering reassurances, telling me I was safe. But I wasn't. I knew what I saw, and I knew deep down that whatever it wasn't done with me yet. Sleep did not come easily. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the creature's horrifying image. My mother's words echoed in my head, "Just your imagination." But I knew better. I could still feel it watching me. Then, something changed. A strange sensation crawled through me, an invisible pull urging me to sit up. My body moved on its own, my feet touching the cold floor as I walked to the window. I didn't want to look, but something made me. The moonlight bathed the snow in an eerie glow, turning night into a pale, frozen dream. And then, I saw it. The creature. It crawled across the yard on all fours, its skeletal limbs moving with slow, deliberate motions. Its head hung low, twitching unnaturally, its long fingers digging into the snow. Then it stopped, as if it knew a slow, sickening turn of its head, its glowing red eyes locking onto mine. My breath caught. I stumbled backward, diving under the covers, squeezing my eyes shut. Heart hammering in my ears, I told myself it wasn't real, that it would be gone by morning, but I didn't believe it. Not for a second. Morning arrived, but the fear from the night before still clung to me. I barely touched my breakfast, my mind replaying the thing I had seen crawling through the snow. Had it really been there? Or had my exhaustion twisted my imagination? Then my father came inside, stomping snow from his boots. His face was tight with confusion. "Did either of you kids go outside last night?" he asked, brushing frost from his jacket. My stomach dropped. My brother shook his head, still half asleep. I barely found my voice. "Why?" Dad frowned. "There are tracks in the snow, like a kid crawled across the yard on their hands and knees." The room went still. The sound of bacon sizzling on the stove seemed distant, almost unreal. I felt sick. My mother laughed lightly. "Probably just an animal," she said, though even she didn't sound convinced. But I knew the truth. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a trick of the light. It had been real. It had been here. And worst of all, it knew where I slept. It was an ordinary winter night. Cold, quiet, and isolating. Snow piled high outside, muffling every sound. In the basement, dimly lit by the flickering glow of a TV screen, a 15-year-old girl sat, lost in her game. Her phone buzzed beside her, a conversation with a friend keeping her company. The rest of the house was silent. Too silent. The storm outside intensified, winds howling against the windows. She barely noticed. She was alone, but that was normal. Nothing to fear. Yet because in the deepest shadows of the house, someone, was already waiting. And they were not alone. Without warning, the house went dark. Not a flicker, not a slow dimming, just instant suffocating blackness. Then came the sound, a low, guttural groan deep within the walls, like something alive struggling to wake. It wasn't the hum of a failing generator. It was something unnatural. The girl froze, her breath catching in her throat. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the silence was deafening. She reached for her phone. Barely any battery left. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy. From upstairs, she wasn't alone. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she turned toward the basement stairs and listened. The house was silent. Too silent. Except for the footsteps, slow, heavy, boots pressing into the kitchen floor, pacing back and forth. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was there. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed herself against the cold basement wall, her mind racing. Maybe it was just her brother, home early. Maybe her dad forgot something and came back. But then, where is the girl? The voice was deep, rough, and filled with frustration. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't just inside the house. He was looking for her. Her body screamed for her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The basement had no outside door, only a small, frozen window, too buried in snow to escape through. If she ran upstairs, she'd be trapped. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind howling outside. Then the first step creaked. Then another slow, deliberate. He was coming downstairs. She backed away, heart hammering in her chest. She needed to hide, now, because whatever he wanted, he wouldn't stop until he found her. She darted into the storage room, heart pounding, hands shaking, dark. Cramped. Dust clung to the air. She scanned the space, nowhere to hide, no closets, no furniture big enough to shield her. Then, there. A tiny gap between two massive water softeners, barely wide enough. She squeezed in, forcing her body into the suffocating space, pulled a dusty tablecloth over herself, held her breath. Footsteps reached the basement floor. Slow, searching, the door handle twitched. Then silence. She bit down on her trembling lip, forcing herself to stay still. Then a low, frustrated growl, and the door creaked open. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone, fingers numb with terror. The screen barely glowed, 1% battery. No time to think, no time to breathe. She dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" Her voice broke. Please help me. I'm 15. I'm alone. There's a man in my house looking for me." Tears streamed down her face as she squeezed herself tighter between the water softeners, the dusty cloth barely covering her. The operator spoke, calm, steady, trying to keep her grounded. "Stay on the line. Where are you in the house?" She opened her mouth, then froze. A new sound. The soft creak of the basement doors swinging open. The footsteps were slower now, controlled. He was searching closer. She pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting the sob threatening to escape. The cold from the metal tank seeped into her skin, but she barely felt it. She could hear him breathing. Then a low chuckle. Dark, twisted. "I know you're down here." Her body locked up, paralyzed in fear. The operator's voice was distant now. "Help is on the way." But would they be fast enough? Just as the footsteps neared the storage room, a new sound shattered the silence. The front door burst open, a voice, loud, furious. Her father. "Whoever the hell is in my house, get thee out. I have a gun." The heavy boots suddenly stopped. A tense pause, then rapid footsteps, fleeing. The girl stayed frozen, breath ragged, body shaking. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Then she ran, bolting from her hiding spot, up the stairs, straight into her parents' arms, sobbing, shaking, safe. But as she clung to them, one thought lingered. How did he get in? The house should have been in chaos. Broken windows, a forced door, something to explain how he got in, but there was nothing. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut, their frames undisturbed beneath thick layers of frost. No shattered glass, no busted locks. It was as if he had never been there at all. Her father checked every room, every closet. Empty, silent. But the girl knew what she had heard, what she had felt. She followed him hesitantly into the kitchen. The floor was clean, no muddy footprints, no sign that heavy boots had ever stomped across it. Except outside, just beyond the kitchen window, the snow remained untouched. Except for a single set of footprints. They led straight to the house, but there were no tracks leading away. The wind howled through the trees, sending snow drifting over the deep, motionless prints. She stared at them, her stomach twisting. Had he ever really left, or worse, had he ever really entered? Her mother pulled her into a hug, whispering, "You're safe now." But as the night stretched on, she couldn't shake the feeling something was still watching.